Welcome. Let me tell you a story, or rather, a story behind a story. And like any good story, it's the story of a kingdom and its king, and how he came to make everything right. This is a very important story, you see, because it tells of how all of your deepest and most cherished hopes are coming true. And I know you'd like to believe that, but it's hard. In a world of darkness and difficulty, it's very easy to get caught up in lies, to get caught up in deception, to allow truth to be downplayed and discouraged, and to lose hope. And we don't want that. So let me tell you a story of how all your deepest and most cherished hopes are coming true. Where to begin? Well, let's begin in the middle. That's as good a place as any. We'll begin with a man named Zechariah. Now, Zechariah was a priest, and a good one too. He was a good husband. He lived with his wife Elizabeth, and they both obeyed the Lord. However, they had something that made them very sad. You see, they were old, and they were never able to have any kids. But, as is often the case with God, sadness and loss can make soft soil where God can plant good seeds to grow good fruit. One day, Zechariah was chosen by Lot, which some of us might think is random, but with God, random isn't random. Anyway, he was chosen by Lot, and it was his turn to do something very rare. He was to go into the temple of the Lord and burn incense. And as he burned incense, and the beautiful smelling smoke rose up to the sky, the people would all gather outside to pray, and their prayers would go up like a sweet-smelling smoke up to God. Now you should know that it was very typical for the hour of incense, the prayers sent up on the hour of incense, to be prayers for the great king, told about in the old stories of Israel, the old stories of Zechariah's people. Prayers were for the great king to come and make all things right, and to rule over the people of Israel and the world. Yet, we might guess that at a time of prayer, there would be another prayer that was very dear to the heart of Zechariah, the prayers of a lifetime waiting for a child. Now, this is where things get interesting. Zechariah was doing his job, burning the incense, and to his great surprise and great terror, someone great and terrible appeared by the altar. It was an angel. And Zechariah was overcome with fear. But the angel said, "Do not be afraid, Zechariah, because your prayer has been heard. Your wife Elizabeth will bear you a son, and you will name him John. There will be joy and delight for you, and many will rejoice at his birth. For he will be great in the sight of the Lord. He will never drink wine or beer. He will be filled with the Holy Spirit while still in his mother's womb. He will turn many of the children of Israel to the Lord their God, and he will go before him in the spirit and power of Elijah, to turn the hearts of the fathers to their children, and the disobedient to the understanding of the righteous, to make ready for the Lord a prepared people." As you can imagine, Zechariah was shocked. This was incredible. This was impossible. "How can I know this?" asked Zechariah. "I'm old and my wife is well along in years." The angel responded, "I am Gabriel, who stands in the presence of God, and I was sent to speak to you and tell you this good news. Now listen, you will become silent and unable to speak until the day these things take place, because you did not believe my words, which will be fulfilled in their time." Thus, Zechariah could no longer speak, and that gave him a lot of time to think. If you know about such things, there is quite a number of days between the time a child is conceived and the time a child is born. I say, Zechariah had a lot of time to think. Several things happened in the meantime, which we'll talk about next time. And so I might imagine that Zechariah had many swirling thoughts in his mind. Will my wife Elizabeth be okay? Can I take care of this baby? And what about what the angel said? The spirit and power of Elijah, turning hearts, making ready people for the Lord? These thoughts swirled because Zechariah knew the stories. You see, the stories had been passed down, the stories of Israel, the stories of God and history. As a boy, his father and his grandfather would sit around the table at Shabbat and tell stories of the king who was to come. And in the festivals, they'd take time off and they'd spend time remembering about what God had done and what God would do to rescue his people, Israel. And as a priest, he had heard the old prophecies about a great king hundreds of times. Could this have anything to do with that? You know, even in the oldest of scriptures, Zechariah would think back and remember that Jacob to his boys said, "The scepter will not depart from Judah, or the staff from between his feet, until he whose right it is comes, and the obedience of the people belongs to him." Yes, long ago a great ruler was promised, way back in the book of Moses. Or how about in the old songs? In Psalm 89, the Lord had said, "I have made a covenant with my chosen one. I have sworn an oath to David my servant. I will establish your offspring forever and build up your throne for all generations." Or in the prophets, it was prophesied that Bethlehem was told, "You are small among the clans of Judah, and one will come from you to be a ruler over Israel for me. His origin is from antiquity, from ancient times." Or again, one of the great songs of old was this from Psalm 132. "The Lord has chosen Zion. He has desired it for his home. This is my resting place forever. I will make it my home here because I have desired it. I will abundantly bless its food. I will satisfy its needy with bread. I will clothe its priests with salvation, and its faithful people will shout for joy. There I will make a horn grow for David. I have prepared a lamp for my anointed one. I will clothe its enemies with shame, and the crown he wears will be glorious." Yes, Zechariah knew that the song spoke of a king who would rule, a horn who would come from the line of David, powerful to destroy the enemies of God. And as he thought, the angel said, "Prepare the way of the Lord." He knew that was from the prophet Isaiah, where it is said that the glory of the Lord will return to Israel. There will be this good news that will come for God's people, good news of rescue. Yes, the people of Israel were waiting for a king who would rescue them, a king who would bring real obedience and righteous rule, a king who would bring peace and abundance to Israel, a king who would be strong and unyielding, like the horn of a ram, who would overtake the enemies of God. Yes, this king, he would make all things right. Israel, the people of God, would no longer be oppressed. They would no longer have the anxiety of uncertainty. They would no longer live under suffering. They would no longer be fearful. And so as Zechariah waited, he wondered. As the people were hearing of these things, they wondered, what was coming about? Who would this child be? And then one day, the time came. Elizabeth gave birth to a son, and everyone around rejoiced. And they came to name him, and all were excited for this little baby, who they would call Zechariah. But Elizabeth said, "No, his name is John." And all the people looked at each other and looked at Elizabeth and looked at the baby, and they said, "John? No one in your family is named John." So they asked Zechariah, and Zechariah wrote down, "The boy's name is John." Zechariah was ready to see what God would do. Zechariah was ready to obey. And then Zechariah could speak, just as the angel had said, and he rejoiced. And everyone was amazed. All the surrounding villages were questioning, saying, "Who will this boy be?" Finally, as Zechariah could talk, he was filled with the wonder and the excitement of months of bottled up thoughts. And the Holy Spirit of God came upon him, and he prophesied. And he said, "Blessed is the Lord, the God of Israel, because he has visited and provided redemption for his people. He has raised up a horn of salvation for us in the house of his servant David, just as he spoke by the mouth of his holy prophets in ancient times, salvation from our enemies and from the hands of those who hate us. He has dealt mercifully with our ancestors, and he remembered his holy covenant, the oath he swore to our father Abraham, to grant that we, having been rescued from the hand of our enemies, would serve him without fear, in holiness and righteousness, in his presence all our days. And he looked down to John, and he prophesied, "And you, child, will be called a prophet of the Most High, for you will go before the Lord to prepare his ways, to give his people knowledge of salvation through the forgiveness of their sins. Because of our God's merciful compassion, the dawn from on high will visit us, to shine on those who live in darkness and the shadow of death, to guide our feet into the way of peace." In all his thoughts, Zechariah had this remembrance of the old stories. He had his encounter with the angel, and he had the revelation of the Spirit. Zechariah finally knew that this baby John was coming as a messenger. Not just any messenger, but the kind of messenger that comes when a new king is coming to take over. A good messenger with a good message. This king was to be God's king, the king of the line of David, the promise of God, the one to defeat the enemies, the king of light and the king of peace, who would take on darkness and chaos and win. This is the great story. And I think a story that we need to hear. Because, you see, as I said, we've come in the middle. The expectation of the king was built up over many centuries of waiting. The king to come, the king that Zechariah prophesied about, that his son John was to prepare a people for, he is the answer to God's promises. He is the one who fulfills all our deepest and most cherished hopes. He is the king who will make all things right. Now, indeed, this may have happened a long time ago, but the story of the king is continuing, and the hope that it brings is perhaps unexpected. For the king came, but he did not come and destroy all the enemies as Zechariah and Elizabeth may have expected. Indeed, he didn't come and do it in a way we might have planned. But he came and he declared victory over the most powerful and enduring of enemies. You see, there are great enemies to this king. There are great forces of darkness. There is a great dragon who fully intends to destroy all that is good. He intends to lie, to kill, and to destroy those who would serve the king and to steal their joy. There are other forces of darkness as well that are intent on doing the dragon's bidding, who relish in blindness and sickness and deception and fear. But we know the story. I hope we are those who have sided with the king. We are those who glory in this peace and this light and this righteousness and this wisdom. And on the note of wisdom, we're told that those who would be wise must know in Psalm 92, as it says, that the wicked will sprout like grass, and evildoers will flourish, but they will be eternally destroyed. But you, our King, are exalted forever. And we are his citizens if we follow him. And thus we'll be with him forever, for he is the King who will restore all things. Every wrong thing will be right. Every anxiety, every fear, every danger, every sickness, all will be taken away in the reign of this King, and all will be made right. And now at this season, we continue to celebrate. We give gifts, we join together, we build anticipation through various ways, and we think about what would be good for others, and we give. We fulfill desires. And that is exactly what the coming of this King brought, this King Jesus. That's exactly what his kingdom is like, the fulfillment of all hope. Do you believe this story? Tell me then, why should you fear? Should we fear uncertainty? Should we fear the schemes of the dragon or the schemes of other people? Should we fear loss or danger or embarrassment or opposition? Should we fear how others respond to this story? No. Indeed, we should not fear anything. For we are of his kingdom, which was coming for Zechariah, which has come, and which is coming in its fullness. The king came, and the king is coming. This is something to celebrate indeed. But more on that next time. For now, we wait.